Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome back to another episode of Causon and the Customer, our weekly podcast discussing all things customer service and effective business leadership with some of the most knowledgeable on the subject. Last week we had the insightful and absolutely wonderful Chris Pitt, CEO of First Direct, to give us a leader's perspective. And this week we have something a little bit different. I'm very excited to introduce our guest, who many of you may already know from her work as consumer editor at the Financial Times, where she frequently advises on personal finance and consumer affairs. Or you may know her from her fantastic book, What They Don't Teach You About Money. And you may have even heard from her on the radio, where she's a regular guest on Nick Ferrari's show on LBC. Claer Barrett joins me today, and we discuss the current outlook from the perspective of the consumer, the significant challenges faced by businesses in a volatile economic climate, and what steps business and government can do to start improving things. So a very warm welcome, everybody, to today's podcast. And I am super excited because today I am joined by the renowned and brilliant journalist, Claer Barrett.
What an introduction.
Well, it's true, Claire. So we're very lucky. And it's not very often I get to be able to turn the tables and be the journalist. So I'm particularly excited to be. No need to be scared. But Claire is consumer editor and columnist at the Financial Times, and she took that position in 2020. But she is an amazing journalist that actually spans both the consumer press but also the business press, and that's really quite interesting in terms of a combination. Writes the weekly Serious Money column and presents the FT's Money Clinic. Aside from that, I'm not sure you get much time aside from that, but I know that you are a regular commentator generally about consumer and financial affairs across a whole range of media, radio and TV. And you are also a regular attendee at the Nick Ferrari breakfast show, where you do the big spot, I think, on consumer affairs, but also business and the impact of financial services.
Thursdays and Fridays, we go through the big business stories, and of course, many of the ones that interest me are the ones with a consumer angle. Yeah, and then I'm also on The Rain on Wednesday mornings on ITV. Slightly different audience, but again, talking about finance, consumer issues and how they impact that audience. So it's great to be able to speak to such a wide spectrum of consumers, from the very wealthy, nice readers of the Financial Times, all the way down to people who happen to catch me on the radio, or maybe want to improve their finances and are listening to the Money Clinic podcast. But the best thing about it all, Joe, is that I hear from all of them. People message me on Instagram. I'm at Claer B. If you want to follow me, I'm on all of the social media platforms. And I would say one of the best and most valuable parts of my job is hearing from ordinary people about how they think the companies, and the financial companies in particular servicing them, could be doing a better job.
Which is brilliant. So, and we're definitely going to talk about that, because I'm really interested in understanding what customers and consumers are saying, and whether that's consistent, whether it's got worse, Claire, are there particular themes? Because I think this is really important, because obviously this podcast will go out to lots of our listeners who are businesses. So it's great to have you to do that. And also I do want to give a bit of a plug for your book, because I think this is also very important, because your book is What They Don't Teach You About Money. So I think that would be very interesting too, because we have got a big issue, haven't we, in the UK about funny relationship with money. Sometimes we're a bit scared about it. Sometimes we perhaps don't manage that as well as we possibly can. We were talking earlier about the different personalities that you talk in the book about, in terms of, are we certain characters and
certainly it's been good for a lot of financial businesses that UK consumers are not the savviest when it comes to their own finances. It's a nurture, and not being able to feel empowered enough to make a decision works very well for them often. Slashing savings rates or whacking up mortgage rates, but not very well for us.
And also on that, ultimately, I might argue, Claire, that in the long term it's not good for business either.
No.
Because, obviously if we want to try and grow the agenda, we want more people to be more confident about what they're doing with their money, how they spend it, whether it's worth it, making all of those trade-offs and decisions. So I think we definitely should talk about that. But let's start with, what is going on in the consumer landscape, and has that, if you think about the issues and challenges that people are raising with you, what's the biggest bugbears, Claire?
Well, you very kindly helped me write an enormous article in the FT nearly 6 months ago now, which we basically said customer service, can it get any worse in the UK? And that was really inspired by the fact that I just was finding that everyone I was talking to, in all of the aspects of my various different jobs and different hats, I was just coming across people who were fighting these seemingly never-ending battles with different companies, whether it was an energy firm, a broadband company. They were having a dispute with a clothing retailer about a return that allegedly hadn't been received and wouldn't be refunded. A credit card company, somebody who had done them a bad deal. They were fearful about negotiating with their mortgage lender, with rates shooting up. All over the place, customer service just seemed to have died a death. It just wasn't a feature of the landscape anymore. And a few months before I wrote that huge investigation in the FT, I'd done a piece about John Lewis, one of Britain's best loved retailers, but also a really good example, along with British Airways perhaps, there being another one, of brands that we have held in high esteem and seen as a premium and better at customer service perhaps than the rest of the market after the pandemic really start to disappoint our expectations. And the volume of feedback after writing these articles, emails from FT readers, messages on Instagram from people who'd seen my posts about all of this, I don't think I've ever had more feedback on another topic. And I write about a lot of stuff, and it just really hit a nerve that customer service needs to improve across the whole gamut of consumer-facing businesses in the UK, that people have had enough. They don't want to be palmed off with an electronic chatbot.
Yeah.
And also, one of the most surprising bits of research I think that you have produced, around a third of us are prepared to pay more if we get better customer service, which was one of the key takeaways.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for quoting that. And you're absolutely right. Yeah, and that's been very consistent, actually, Claire. So we've been tracking that. So even pre and actually during the pandemic and since, it's actually gone up. So from, in terms of how many of us are prepared to pay more. So we've got, and again, the UK CSI is also demonstrating that customer service is definitely under pressure. And if you think about what people were complaining about, or what consumers are finding difficult, if you had to summarise that in terms of talking to the business community, what are the top things that really seem to be irritating people?
Well, I think it all boils down to one thing, which is, are we getting value for money? Mm-hmm. Because we've had the pandemic, a huge financial shock, then we've had the cost of living crisis, inflation, prices soaring, everything becoming more and more unaffordable. And as a consumer, you're looking at every single outgoing, and whatever it is, from car insurance to the price you're paying for your groceries, your rent, your mortgage, everything is going up at once. And the thing that hasn't been going up, of course, is people's pay packets, although we're seeing a bit of a delayed effect, thank goodness, coming through now. So if a retailer or a service business is going to compete to get you to spend your hard-earned pound with it, you want to make sure that you're getting a good bang for your buck. Are you getting good value? And there are lots of ways that consumers have felt they've either been getting poor service, poor value, disputes over pricing levels. We can talk a bit later maybe about loyalty cards and how you basically need one now to do the grocery shop, or you're going to get ripped off, in my humble opinion. But what really has made consumers angry is that if they want to complain about the way that they've been treated, the price rise that has been foisted upon them, the poor service they think they've received, it seems to be much, much harder now to actually speak to a human being who can actually do something about their problem and resolve it. Now, an awful lot of the need to speak to customer service agents, especially with the more financial companies, is financial distress.
Yeah.
We've got, I think, nearly £3 billion now of fan energy debt in the system. Now, that hasn't gone away, even though people might be feeling a bit more rosy tinted about the economic prospects and inflation falling. Lots of the energy companies, their helplines are going to be stuffed with people just saying, I can't afford to pay the bill. And they don't really have an answer for that other than referring them to debt management services. Meanwhile, people who want to get through to talk about power outage or the fact that they don't understand their bill, having to wait for longer and longer periods of time, that seems to be a theme that you've picked up in your research too. The number of complaints are rising. The amount of time it takes to resolve our complaints is also rising. And then you get the feeling that firms are not being entirely honest, customers think, with how they log complaints. If they don't log it as a complaint, then maybe they don't have to deal with it. And this just general handing off, outsourcing of customer service, seeing it as a cost rather than as a retention tool and something that's vital to keep that relationship between the customer and the business flowing, and to convince me to spend more money with them.
Yeah, so quite a lot in there, Claire, but I think there's some interesting themes, and we certainly see some of those key aspects coming up in our research. So the first piece really about complaints, and the choice, do I have choice that I can talk to a human being? And we certainly see that. The number one request in the UK CSI is when things go wrong, can I talk to a human being? As, I guess, technology improves, as AI improves, how, it's not necessarily a need to talk to a human being, it's about the frustration about getting my issue resolved.
Yeah.
So
it's often quite a simple question.
Yes.
That the chatbot doesn't know.
Yes, how to deal with that.
Yeah.
And I think certainly our first generation chatbots, when we talked about this, as you kindly mentioned before, have not, they have disappointed. AI is catching up. The speed of that is definitely improving. And we talk a lot about a blended approach towards the customer experience. Because the other side of this is that, as you mentioned, about costs for consumers have gone up, costs for businesses have gone up.
It's very true. The cost of staff, especially.
Yes. So there's always a bit of a trade-off. But we also know that there's no excuse for not being able to deliver against the things that you have promised. So as an organisation, if you promise to deliver something, then you actually have to hit that within whatever SLAs that you have set. And I think that's where a frustration comes. And what you're talking about, I agree with Claire, where if an organisation has promised to do this within a particular time frame to the quality of the goods and services and then disappoints us, and then we can't get hold of them, that absolutely is a big issue, and certainly will drive down customer satisfaction levels. So I think there's that bit about being able to be responsive, the bit about choice, and we're big components about trying to find that opportunity. Some of us are quite happy to self-serve. Some of us, if the journey goes on, when I was doing renewing my passport, unbelievable service. I didn't touch a human being, but I went in on the Monday, and within a week, online on the Monday, within a week, my passport's back through the door, and they tracked that, and they told me everything and every single stage of that. So that was a brilliant use of technology being able to deliver. The other point that you've raised, and I think this is goes to a hub of this, about trust, and do I feel that this organisation is ripping me off or not telling me the truth? And in the last UK CSI, we've definitely seen that, the relationship between, do I trust this organisation? Do I think that this organisation cares about me? Are they operating in an ethical way? And I really think that businesses not only should be thinking about their transactional, does the process work, and does Claire or Joe get their passport or their donut or whatever we're buying, but how we do that. And I think there's a big thing that business needs to think about, Claire. And if you think about what's going on the financial services side at the moment, I'd be really interested in, is there anything that you're seeing that you think that's good? And actually that would really help to improve trust and try to improve the relationship that we're having as consumers with businesses.
Well, I mean, the great irony, of course, of anyone experiencing financial distress, the last people almost they're going to phone for help are the companies that they owe the money to. Very understandably, because you think, well, they might cut me off, they might close down my
and are frightened.
my
And there's all
account.
sorts of other things going on for them too, isn't there?
Yeah.
In terms of feeling embarrassed or awkward or all sorts of stuff around that.
So we've seen some banks, interestingly, the one that comes top of your customer service poll, First Direct, they took a very different approach. And around a year ago, they started making outbound calls. Very rare for a bank to make, which is something I say about fraud all the time. Banks phoning you up, always question whether it really is them. But nevertheless, First Direct have been reaching out to customers who they can see from the data are in financial distress, have refused payments, have not got so much money coming in as they used to perhaps, and have said, how can we help you? And actually, the CEO said, once you get past that initial barrier of, oh, I'm in trouble, the bank are phoning up, people are very receptive to receiving help because they don't really know who else to turn to. And there is so much that banks can do in terms of helping people to sort their financial lives out, be a bit more organised. There are some problems that are obviously beyond the bank's control, but it's just having that ability to say, contact us, we're here, we're ready to talk. We've seen it with the mortgage lenders, with the big hike up in mortgage rates after the mini budget, people having payment shock, rolling off low rates onto higher ones. Communication, even if you're in a tight spot, is always going to get you a better result than just ignoring, the red bills or the letters. And I think we really have seen firms make a concerted effort to look at the ways that they can speak to customers. I heard that one mortgage company was offering to talk to customers on WhatsApp, and I think there were regulatory problems with that in the end. But if you think about it, that's how many younger people prefer to communicate. I find as a journalist, choice. It's difficult to get people on the phone sometimes because they'd rather do emails. A consistent frustration from FT readers was the fact that you can't email companies. That seems to be a channel of communication that suits us because we could maybe email at the evening or the weekend to say, could you look into this problem for me? They don't want to have the burden of then having to respond, so you've got to go through the system where you're either in a chat or a queue and you're hanging on. And I hear so much from people who are just not in jobs where they can have their mobile phone on hold playing with Aldi next to them for an hour while they get on with other tasks. Try doing that if you're a school teacher.
And also, and I think you raise a really important point, and again, the Institute would definitely support that, about channel of choice. And, if we have an issue, definitely as customers and consumers, our channel of choice is very often email, because it's also trackable and we have that audit trail about I sent you this, and it's just easier, isn't it, in terms of that piece. I think it's also really interesting that you talked about what good practice looks like. And again, we've seen this not just in financial services sectors, where organisations genuinely outreach and say, look, are you okay? We've noticed this. It's not seen as an intrusion, it's actually seen as helpful advice and support, because the company is no longer faceless. It's that opportunity to engage. So I think you raise a really good point.
Can I mention one more bank? It's not often that banks impress me. It's usually the reverse. But one topic that I've started writing about more recently is neurodiversity. Now, lots of people, the heckles get up and they say, oh, ADHD, it's an invented condition and anybody could go get diagnosed with it. To which I say, rubbish. I'm sorry, try having a child who's been diagnosed with ADHD and then come back and say the same thing. But Monzo is one bank that has been looking at how it can develop services that will help people who are neurodiverse better manage their finances. It's quite a large set of problems stemming from what I would describe as kind of organisational issues. People who are neurodiverse, unfortunately, are much more prone to impulse spending, for example, but also just not being able to organise their finances in a way that they pay bills on time, often get hit with late payments. So Monzo thought, what services could we develop that would actually be an improvement, not just for those customers, of course, but for many other people. And one of the ones that really impressed me, as well as being able to control what sort of marketing messages you want to receive, you can switch off all messages about borrowing, for example, if you think you would be tempted, you can opt out of overdrafts. They've looked at things that small business owners struggle with And one of those is putting the money aside to pay tax bills. So if you want, on the Monzo Pro business account, and you've got to pay a little bit of money every month for this service, you set the percentage level, and every single payment that you have coming into your business account, it will automatically deduct a slice of that payment and put it in what's called a tax pot. So you can save it up to pay your tax bill in January or whenever your year end falls. And it's innovations like that. They don't cost the company any money really to do, other than the innovation needed to think of it. But they're listening to their customers and they're saying, what kind of digital services could we provide that would actually make your life easier? And what's more, make it easier for you to run your business, to run your life, without having to remember to allocate different pots of money around. And I just think that is the most brilliant example.
I couldn't agree more. And there's a couple of bits in that in terms of lessons or learnings also for other sectors, because what you clearly articulated, Claire, is thinking about the customer in the round. So not just thinking about that as a transaction, but thinking about what the hell is going on in this customer's life, what are the kind of the main pain points for them, and anything that we can do. Because we've never got enough time, have we? I mean, there's a really interesting issue at the moment, I think, that we're all short of time. We're all running from one thing to another. And technology has been brilliant in terms of helping some of that, instant. But instant is also causing other issues or challenges for us, because we're expecting everything to be instant, and now we're having to jump that hamster wheel. So where organisations are thinking a bit more broadly about what's going on in my customer's life, the customer journey, and being able to support some of those things, again, that really helps on a whole host of levels. It helps brand loyalty. I'm much more likely to stay with this organisation because they care about me, back to that other point. But it also probably reduces the issues and problems in another part of society, because it's not a massive shock, is it, when I've got to pay my tax bill because I've actually got this pot here that's thinking about it.
And also word of mouth. I'm talking about it.
Yes.
Quite a few people that I've mentioned this to have said, I'm going to move my account to Monzo. That's a genius idea. And it's probably something that in time the other banks will copy, because Monzo, Starling, the other digital banks, Chase, they all offer this ability now to set up different pots, so you can separate cash and align it towards different goals. And I've got one where I save up a certain amount of money every month to pay on car insurance. Because car insurance is just one of those things. A few years ago it was 400 quid. Now it's like
1,200.
Yeah, exactly. And if you've got a nice motor, my goodness, if you drive a Land Rover Discovery, being able to get insured at all.
There's a whole story about that, actually, because apparently they're the most stolen parts and bits for Russia. So that's one of the reasons why they're such an expensive insurance, because they're being stolen and shipped out to Russia for parts. So,
but I'm just any kind of innovation that helps people to get a better handle on their finances, to feel empowered to deal with their finances. Because one of the most talked about financial personalities in my book is the ostrich.
Okay.
The person who buries their head in the sand when it comes to trouble. And I freely admit that, in my student days, I was an ostrich. And I'm happy to admit that, because I'm obviously now not an ostrich, so there's also people listening.
And not only that, Claire, it's enabled you to write the book and also understand what it's like. Yeah, absolutely. And that's an interesting word, empathise or empathy. Again, going back to where organisations, I think, do well is when they genuinely connect and they can empathise, which is another aspect around having the right people. That are empowered enough to be able to make, when you've got that complex issue or problem, they know what they're talking about, they're empowered to make the decision. You don't have to wait, for ages. So that sense of being able to be connected to the organisation, either through the staff and colleagues that are serving you, but also having empathetic IT. And I think we're still a bit of a way from that, but it's getting better, it's getting more intuitive. And being able to drive that. So tell me a bit about the book. What are the personalities? I'm really interested in kind of what personality I might be.
Okay, well, we've covered the ostrich, very common. And I should say, as a caveat, most people are a blend. They've got elements of different personalities. So the Spendy Wendy. I tried to think of a man's name where I'm with Spendy. It's not a slight on women, but people who just feel as soon as they've got money in their pocket, they want to spend it. Exactly. I also have a tendency towards that at certain times. Then on the other side, we've got the goblin, the person who hoards their gold. Is very, very cautious about either spending any of it, but also investing it, which can be a big problem. The spreadsheet slave I came up with. A man at one of my book events came up to me and said, I am a spreadsheet slave, and I have got a spreadsheet of every single piece of money I've spent since the late 1980s. And my wife wants to divorce me because I don't pay to go on a holiday. And I said, listen, book the holiday, take it from me. It will be cheaper than the divorce. So I hope he did. But it's all about control. If they can control every aspect of their finances, is that maybe making up for a lack of control elsewhere? But also, is it stopping them from living in the here and now? Because it's all about the balance. The YOLO, you only live once, that's one that I put in just because I meet so many young people who think, I'm never going to be able to afford to save up to buy a property, particularly in London and the South East, so I'm going to invest it all in crypto and, to the moon. That's the only way I can get rich quick, by taking some huge gamble. That's something that worries me intensely about the younger generation, because life is just so
uncertain
and frankly the career prospects, what you would earn now as a journalist at an entry level, whoever's listening to this podcast, you think about your job, what you were paid when you started from university and what we're paying graduates now, the difference is not all that great. Wages for younger people have been going backwards at a time when living costs have been going up, and all of the privileges that we had, travelling on a shoestring. I mean, I'm a member of the EasyJet generation. When I was at university, I can remember saying, "Oh, come on, we've got a last bit of the student lane left. We can get a flight to Turin for £11." The next day, we'd be off. We're trying to really squeeze the most out of life, and we felt optimistic about our prospects. We had a lightness of being, as one of my friends had said, that generations coming through don't, for various reasons. So lots and lots of different financial personalities, but I suppose if we had to maybe apply them a little bit to the types of consumer in the market. I mean, I think the dominant type of consumer now is very much the value seeker. And by value seeking, I don't mean necessarily the person who buys everything in Aldi or Lidl, although the budget supermarkets have done fantastically well. I mean the kind of person who will not buy anything unless it's on a deal or on a discount, or they can get...
And they've compared multiple product services, and they've looked that through.
Lots of research. Fantastic app if you're a supermarket deal spotter, trolley.co.uk. I'll tell everyone about it. If you buy branded goods, it will tell you who's the cheapest out of all the supermarkets and high street chemists, and even Amazon on some categories. But it really makes a difference for people. I had a text from my local GP this week. They're trying to get enough people together in the area who want to join the Hackney Shopping Co-op. They're called, so that single old ladies, I think it's mostly aimed at, can club together and buy things in bulk through the club and be able to split that into smaller items, because they just don't have the storage space to be able to
and as you said, a single person doesn't want to buy all of those things. Multiple goods you don't want necessarily to be eating X, Y and Z every single day of the week, because you could only buy multiple.
And then in the clothing space, huge shift in consumer perceptions of second-hand. Quite pleasingly, I think, over the years, the absolute rise of the shopper trader, I would call it. People who are buying items of clothing on Vinted, especially, but are also selling as well. Someone thinking, well, you know what, I'll probably only wear that 2 or 3 times, but then I can sell it again and I can buy something else. The amount of stuff for children that you find, not just on Vinted, but on marketplaces, on WhatsApp groups, people who are really trying to monetize
behaviour. I mean, back to your point, I think that is a definite, and since COVID, and also some of the environmental issues and sustainability, I think it's much more accepted now that, we will trade those things. And I agree with you, I think that's a great opportunity. And also, back to business, an opportunity for them to be really thinking about how they support that. We have got examples of some organisations that have said, look, bring it back here and we'll recycle that, or we'll retrade that for you. So there's
Boots will give you a cash voucher if you scan in 5 empty products put them in a recycling bin in its store, and then it will give you money off
Which is
things
brilliant.
you're buying.
Yeah, and I think that for me, Claire, is about that bit, which is what we started with really, the connection between the consumer and the organisation, so they're not faceless. And you talked about value. Value isn't for us also just about price. Value is do I think I am getting value from this experience? And I think sometimes organisations get that wrong as well, because it isn't just about trading about price, notwithstanding your points, which I do agree with, over cost of living, inflationary pressures. Just on that, we haven't got to this, and I know that we're rambling around all over the place, but I love that, and that's one of the things that I love talking to you about, Claire. New government. Exciting new brave world.
Well, it was until they killed the mood. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So how are we going to get this growth up? Because, so a bit of context here. We will talk about the service economy. 80% of GDP comes from service. 60% of our workforce are in customer-related roles. It's critical, as far as we're concerned, that we've got to get the service economy moving, got to have greater levels of confidence. What's your thoughts? What do you think, Claire, would really help both business and government to really kind of inject that more positive mood? What would you like to see?
Okay, well, I think you can divide the country at the moment into two types of people. On the one hand, people who are worried about making their next paycheck last until the end of the month. And on the other hand, those of us who have got a bit more money who are thinking, well, how much more am I going to be taxed after the 30th of October when we finally get Rachel Reeves' first budget, which we've been warned to brace ourselves for. I mean, I've been trying to calm down the mood of the nation by saying all of the tax rises that are rumoured, she can't possibly do them all. But as somebody who is in her 40s and looking to be in the workforce for the next 20 or 30 years, if something major happens to pension saving, that's going to obviously be very upsetting, because that's something that I've been doing for a long time. If the rules change there, I'll be upset. Inheritance taxes, wealth taxes, property taxes, changes to capital gains taxes. Lots of these taxes, the average person on the street might not really understand what they do, but they will feel the impact nevertheless if it affects the level of business investment coming into the UK, the level of hiring that firms are being able to do. Yeah. I mean, I mentor quite a lot of people in different areas of my life. And one of the things that anecdotally is really coming through to me at the moment is that it's a lot harder for people to get pay rises all of a sudden. Yeah. It's a lot harder for people to find jobs. Yeah. There are more redundancies. Yeah. There are more hiring freezes. Firms might not be openly advertising the fact that they're not on the recruit anymore, but there is this climate of fear, nevertheless, in the business world. Like, if we don't have to make a decision before the 30th of October, then let's not make a decision.
And also perhaps some of the day one rights as well, and some of the changes that are being trailed from that side are making organisations perhaps a little bit more cautious in terms of what will be happening on that side.
There's a lot of uncertainty. I mean, there's always uncertainty. But ironically, Britain, when you look at the rest of Europe, is in a really strong position. And when you drill down into the economic data is showing great things could be ahead. Certainly we need to get the economy motoring. It's one of the only ways that we can have a route out of the huge overhang of government debt from the pandemic, the hugely inflated interest bills as a result of higher inflation and higher rates. So lots of economists feel that globally we're at a tipping point now, coming out of the pandemic, out of the cost of living crisis. But of course, what we mustn't forget is that even though the inflation figures might be in low single digits,
they're still significantly higher than they were.
Exactly. All of these price rises, particularly on food, have been embedded. The cost of living crisis absolutely has not gone away. We do need the government to be responsible and look at the books. I accept that we will need to raise taxes in some areas, but I think the problem at the moment is that this doom and gloom and feeling that we don't know where the axe is going to fall. We've seen in the latest consumer confidence reports that people are putting off large purchases. They're feeling less confident about the future. I would add in to that maybe a bit of fear about the future of their jobs. People were already worried before this, of course, about what the impact of AI might be, and just changing consumer habits. I mean, as somebody who works in the media, does it worry me about how few people are buying newspapers nowadays? Of course it does. I mean, we're changing what we offer to our customers at the FT in terms of apps and digital subscriptions, and I'm much more involved in video journalism now.
And podcasts.
That's becoming, a major platform for us alongside the written word. But I mean, look at TV. So much of TV now is streaming. People deciding what to watch on demand. The whole concept of sitting down at a particular time to watch a particular programme. And that's really affecting how advertising works. So these legacy industries, you could call them, it's not just the kind of like heavy industry and manufacturing, it's now the service industries that are having to make these changes and adjustments. So a lot of competition for business investment.
And a lot of competition, but as you said, Claire, a lot of opportunity. And, some of the things that we've already talked about today is how do those organisations really show up for their customers and really think about the services that they're now developing. And what I've heard you say quite a lot this morning, and I think it's really relevant for all of the different industry sectors, about being very cognizant. I mean, this has always been the case, but being really cognizant as an organisation to really understand what's going on in your customers' lives. That end to end, and how you can
What's
really,
the bigger picture?
Yes. And what are those reasons that are actually trying to drive some of the changes. And then also that whole experience, trying to create that. And the more that they outreach, the more that they're looking to be helpful, the more loyal, we have. I know you wanted to talk about loyalty cards, airlines and all the rest of it. So tell me a bit about that, Claire, about in terms of the frustration. Because on the one hand, you could argue, let's just put there's a little bit of a devil's advocate out here, that actually, I want to, the loyalty clubs are driving a sense of a club. If you're committed, you demonstrate loyalty to me, you will get a better service. So I might argue, if I was being tough, why is that an issue? Why, that's surely about, you've got to give me something and I'll give you something back, because that's, good trading practice.
Well, I think the basic problem with all of these loyalty schemes, whether it's supermarkets, airlines, restaurants, coffee places, because they've all got them nowadays, is that over time they have all become less generous. Now, my friend, the coupon king, who's on this morning, I was asking him about this, Jordan Cox. He famously collected lots of coupons when he was like, I think, a 15 or 16-year-old kid, and managed to do a £300 supermarket shop for something like 12 quid. For his mum. So he's an absolute master of money saving. And he agrees with me, and he said, none of the schemes are as generous as they were, but they're all collecting a lot more data from us, which is incredibly valuable to the retailers. Now, there are privacy concerns, obviously, about any data that we're giving to them. It's all anonymised and sold on in aggregate to manufacturers, mostly the sorts of people who will fund an offer, let's say, in the supermarket on one of the ends of the aisles. Maybe you'll send something in the app saying you can get £1 off this particular thing, whether it's a pizza or a fried chicken brand, whatever it is. But they will pay for the data on what sorts of consumers and ages and stages of life are paying for their products. But they'll also say, well, tell us what the rival brand, what are its metrics? And so it's a really big money spinner for these businesses. It's all sort of slightly shady about how this operation even goes about. The FT's done quite a lot of reporting on it in the last year about the levels of profit that retailers especially are able to extract from these loyalty schemes. And I just feel that customers are the ones potentially losing out here, especially now you've got this two-tier pricing situation in most of the big supermarkets. I mean, until I put these apps on my phone, I was routinely popping into a Tesco or a Sainsbury's, let us say, to buy something, and then finding like, oh goodness, like in virtually every category that I want to buy, whether it's loo roll, toothpaste, fresh vegetables, there's something that's really cheap if I have the loyalty card. But if I don't, it's a complete rip-off. It's a much higher price than I would ever expect to pay. So you've got to have the loyalty card in order to pay an acceptable price. Now, there's already a regulatory aspect of this, the competition inquiry that's going on into whether this sort of level of pricing is fair and reasonable, but also that anchor point. So, this used to be this price and now it's this price. They don't have to have those items on sale at a higher price for very long to be able to make it look like it is a whacking great discount. Is it such a genuine discount? But it's more the fact that you've got to have the loyalty card now that annoys me, and that you don't really get as much back from these schemes as you used to back in the day. But in terms of the backlash against them, my colleague Brooke Masters wrote about the airline points schemes. Airline points, credit cards, it's this huge ecosystem. Now, in the US, where flying around is a way of life for business people in a way that it perhaps isn't for us in Europe, the competition authorities over there are investigating the airline point schemes because people have built up huge balances of these points, but their complaint is that they're unable to spend them. Because the free flights, the companion vouchers, the lounge vouchers, all too often when they want to use them, there's no availability. And what is striking, she found, is that a large number of business travellers are saying, you know what, we're going to abandon the loyalty scheme and we're just going to go for the cheap airlines, a seat on the budget airline, because actually that will save us far more money than trying to game the system and collect all of these points. And it's the low cost that we value more than these sort of spurious promises of rewards. And we're seeing that in the supermarket sector too, and in the clothing sector. There are some real standouts who don't offer loyalty systems at all. Aldi being the main grocer, Primark being one of the main retailers. Their message is, it's cheap as chips, come in and fill your boots, we're not going to mess you around trying to force you to collect loyalty points. And I think that how that's going to play out as a journalist is something that really, really interests me.
Yeah, and as a business and as a consumer, because I think there's an issue about time here, Claire, because I don't have time to go to multiple shops, so I'm not going to be using a multiple app every time I go to that. And this term loyalty, if you think about what loyalty is about, I will be loyal to a brand if I think that what I'm getting back is value. Actually,
in financial services, loyalty is often catastrophic. They've had lots of changes recently, but generally shopping around is the way to go.
Absolutely, and obviously the FCA bringing in the change of law earlier this year in terms of dual pricing, I think is a no-brainer and good to see. But I think the clear message here for business is that I do think that loyalty can work, but you've got to think about your scheme, which is what you're saying, and also not about dark arts. The going from it was X amount and now it's 40% cheaper, and now suddenly, now I'm addicted to those chocolate cookies, it's now gone back up to being 40% more
customers
expensive.
are not stupid.
No. So I think that that's a really clear lesson, Claire, that all organisations need to think about. And also when we're talking about what's in it for me, that's the other bit. Is there a big enough attraction to why I would do this? And so I'm not sure that I would necessarily see the death of loyalty. I know you're not suggesting that, loyalty cards, but maybe we just need to be thinking a bit more smartly about what genuinely loyalty means, and if I'm going to give you my data, then that's very valuable. I
expect more back for it.
Yeah. So I think there's some interesting pieces around that. But I think what we have covered, today is really about changing customer issues and challenges and behaviours. The landscape's still tough, and I'm getting that very clearly from you. And post-COVID, still in the cost of living. So organisations need to really be thinking about how they're outreaching and helping, genuinely building better communication and better care of their customers and consumers, and not taking us for granted. I think there's a bit of that. And you said, as customers, we're not stupid. And actually, hopefully, as more information becomes available, there's more transparency. The challenge with that is there's probably too much information. So it's good that we've got people like you, Claire, that can help us to navigate, what information is helpful and useful. Is there anything else? We talked about government, we talked about hopefully trying to drive greater growth. Is there anything else that you think, this is your opportunity to really lean into the business world in particular, that we should be thinking about as organisations? That's one question. The second question to that is there anything at the Institute you'd really like me to be kind of really pushing even further on? So the first thing is, what's the message to businesses?
Well, I think absolutely the message to businesses should be, if you invest in customer service, you will see a return. And I think that the research that the CSI has done in this area is particularly valuable, because all too often customer service is seen as a cost.
Yes.
It's not seen as an opportunity. And it's much cheaper to convince an existing customer to stay and buy more than it is to acquire a fresh new customer in the first place. But I think that people are very willing in general to answer surveys, to provide feedback and to say, actually, this is something about my experience that could have gone better. There are so many barriers that prevent us from being able to pass on even the most basic feedback to firms about the services we're getting, even if that's praising somebody who has done good customer service to us. I always like it when I'm asked at the end of a call if somebody has been particularly helpful today, because I think that if you work in customer service, it's often a very thankless profession, but you are doing an amazing job if you are able to hold on to those customers and stop them from walking out the door. In terms of what research I'd like to see the CSI do more of, anything that makes the business case for customer service.
Yes, and we're big on that.
Obviously, gets a big tick in my book, but also the digital dimension. Yeah. So you mentioned with your passport, there are so many different services as consumers that are either going completely digital, or digital is very much the norm now, and no more so than with banking, online banking. We're seeing branches shrink and disappear. It's been slightly conflated in the business press with the need to give people access to cash. But actually, I think what is the missing link here is giving people access to digital services. Now, if you have got very little money, can you afford to have a smartphone that's capable of running the latest app with your bank's security requirements? Can you even afford to have a broadband connection in your property? I mean, we're seeing digital exclusion. It's not just older people who are affected by this, it's young people too. That is one of the big drivers behind people wanting to visit these newfangled banking hubs on high streets, because they lack the access to the services. They can't go online on a phone app and check their balance, pay their bills, etc., etc. But the services being provided within the bank hubs don't cater for that yet. It's all very set up to providing access to cash, but that's not really the problem here. It's access to digital services. And as more and more of our lives go online, what other areas of business are we going to see that in? Do we need a basic digital standard to bring the rest of the population up, to give cheap or free broadband access, telephony to everybody in the population, bearing in mind that the benefit system is largely becoming online first now, one of the reasons they're having so many problems with pension women. I think that this is an issue that maybe in 2 generations' time won't be such an issue, because people would have grown up with
Although there is some evidence that as we get older we struggle more to learn new things, so that point about choice. But I think it's a really relevant point that you're making, Claire, about access to digital and ensuring that that's not an exclusion. Over the phone bit, I think phones probably are less of an issue, but families having to share laptops and things like that, and there's definitely, we have seen huge issues and challenges.
And even with children, how do you teach young children about spending their own money in a largely cashless world?
Yes,
you can get them a card that's linked to an app, but the app has to be on a device.
Yes.
And would a 7 or an 8-year-old have access to device? Obviously, they can tap and pay with the contactless payment card as much as they like, but are they actually getting the fact that the money is going down? These are real world problems, and I think businesses that are able to come up with brilliant ideas to solve these, fill the gaps, do things in a different way for the digital era, take the customer with them, there's a huge opportunity for that.
And I would agree completely. And I think that providing that wider resource, the outreach, understanding the observations, how customers are behaving, and you make a really valid point about younger people coming through, having that access. Claire, thank you so much for your time as always, and it's always a joy to work with you, and thank you for championing the work of the Institute as well. Really, really appreciate that.
Thanks for having me on.
What a fantastic discussion. I really enjoyed talking with Claire and getting her unique insight as someone who straddles both the consumer and business worlds. So join us next time, where I will be talking to the brilliant customer service expert Peter Cross about the true meaning of customer experience and how it can be a differentiator for your business. Until then, take good care.